This is the part 1 of the story, The Last Survivors. The camera zooms in on the group of survivors as they huddle together in the dimly lit shelter, their faces etched with weariness and fear. The sound of the wind whistling through the broken windows and the creaking of the old wooden beams overhead is the only noise that fills the silence. We see Tom, a rugged-looking man in his mid-30s, sitting with his back against the wall, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. He has a haunted look in his eyes that suggests he has seen more than his fair share of horrors. Beside him, Sarah sits with her daughter, Lily, cradled in her arms. Sarah is a young woman in her mid-20s, with a determined look in her eyes. She has a no-nonsense attitude and a fierce protectiveness when it comes to her child. Max, a scruffy-looking man in his early 30s, is pacing back and forth, his eyes darting around the room as if he expects something to jump out at him at any moment. He doesn't seem to have much faith in the rest of the survivors, preferring to keep to himself. Maya, a petite woman with dark hair and glasses, is poring over a notebook filled with scientific notes. She is determined to find a cure for the virus that has decimated the population, and is constantly tinkering with various chemicals and concoctions. As the camera lingers on each survivor, we see glimpses of their past lives and the events that led them to this point. We see Tom struggling with the guilt of having survived while his comrades fell, Sarah's desperate attempts to keep her family safe as the world around them crumbled, Max's isolation and cynicism as he watched the world fall apart, and Maya's tireless efforts to find a way to save humanity. The camera pulls back to show the survivors together in the shelter, huddled against the cold and the dark. They may be strangers, but they know that they must band together if they hope to survive in this new, terrifying world. The scene ends with the sound of the wind howling outside, a haunting reminder of the dangers that lie just beyond the flimsy walls of their shelter. As the camera zooms in on each character, we learn more about their individual struggles and motivations. Tom's flashback takes us back to his time in the military, where he witnessed firsthand the horrors of war. We see him leading a group of soldiers through a bombed-out city, trying to protect civilians from enemy fire. As the battle rages on, we see Tom's face contort with fear and anguish as his comrades fall around him. We then see him waking up in the shelter, haunted by his memories and struggling to come to terms with his survival. Sarah's flashback shows us her life before the apocalypse, where she worked as a nurse in a busy hospital. We see her interacting with patients, including a young boy who she grows close to. When the virus hits, Sarah's maternal instincts kick in and she does everything in her power to protect her daughter and keep her family safe. Max's flashback takes us to his small apartment, where he is shown living a solitary life. He is shown sitting at his desk, typing away at a computer as news reports of the virus begin to flood in. We see him gradually withdraw from society as the situation worsens, hoarding supplies and becoming increasingly paranoid about the intentions of others. Maya's flashback shows her working in a lab, where she is trying to develop a cure for the virus. We see her working long hours, poring over data and running experiments in a desperate bid to save humanity. Her determination is unwavering, even as the world around her crumbles. As the survivors share their stories, we see the beginnings of a bond forming between them. Despite their differences, they are united in their struggle to survive in this new world. The scene ends with them settling down for the night, each lost in their own thoughts as they try to make sense of the new reality they find themselves in. The flashbacks and dialogue paint a picture of a world that was already on the brink of collapse before the virus struck. We see riots in the streets, economic turmoil, and political unrest. The world was a powder keg just waiting for a spark, and the virus was the match that lit the fuse. Tom's flashback takes us back to his final mission as a soldier, where he was sent to a war-torn country to help quell an uprising. But the situation quickly spiraled out of control, and Tom found himself fighting for his life against a much larger and better-equipped enemy. He barely escaped with his life, but the trauma of the experience stayed with him long after he returned home. Sarah's flashback shows us her struggling to keep her family together in the face of mounting chaos. She watched as the world around her slowly fell apart, and did everything she could to keep her daughter safe. But eventually, they were forced to flee their home and join the ranks of the survivors. Max's flashback takes us to his small apartment, where he watched the world fall apart from the safety of his living room. He was convinced that the apocalypse was inevitable, and he hoarded supplies and weapons in preparation for the worst. When the virus finally hit, he retreated to his apartment and sealed himself off from the outside world. Maya's flashback shows us her working in a lab, where she was one of the first to realize the scope of the virus's spread. She worked tirelessly to develop a cure, but every day brought more bad news. When the virus reached epidemic levels, she was forced to flee the lab and join the ranks of the survivors. As the flashbacks end, the survivors are forced to confront the harsh reality of their situation. They are living in a world without rules, where the only law is survival of the fittest. But even in this bleak landscape, they cling to hope, and to the belief that they can create a new world from the ashes of the old. As they huddle around a small fire, the survivors share their hopes and fears for the future. They know that they must band together to have any chance of survival in this harsh new world. But they also know that there are dangers lurking around every corner, and that they can never let their guard down. The scene ends with the survivors settling in for the night, watching over each other in the flickering light of the fire.